Hey, I'm TJ, and in this video, I'm going to be sitting down with my friend Stephanie, who works as an SDET, and that stands for Software Development Engineer and Test. Now, this role focuses on testing the code that software engineers write to make sure that we don't break stuff and that everything works the way that it's supposed to. Now, Stephanie used to be a music teacher who made the transition into the tech industry, so she has a lot of insights to share about how she made the transition while also helping us learn about a different role in tech outside of software engineering. Now, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel for more careers in tech interviews like this, and like this video to help support my channel.
Yeah, so hey, Stephanie, how you doing?
I'm doing great, TJ. How are you?
I'm good. So can you introduce yourself, tell us your name, and tell us your role and where you currently work as well?
Yes. Hey, my name's Stephanie Engel. Currently, I'm a lead SDET, which is a lead software development engineer and test at the Zebra, which is an insurance comparison rate company. So really exciting stuff. Lead a group of quality engineers as well as SDETs, driving test automation through the company and instilling best practices with software quality. So really exciting stuff.
Wow. Okay, so can you kind of expand more on what an SDET does?
Yeah. So an SDET, what they actually are or do is they're basically a combination between a software developer as well as a quality assurance engineer. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, where you get someone that knows how to actually write code, build tools, build test frameworks as needed, but they also know how to test applications as well. And so the real benefit of having that type of role is we typically serve as a bridge between the developers and the quality engineers. Like the quality engineers can crank out tests, the developers can build the applications, but oftentimes you need that person in the middle that really specializes in building the tools and setting up the data and all that infrastructure to make that testing go smoothly.
Interesting. So do you have a computer science background, or what's your background in terms of how you got into this field?
Yeah, so short answer, no, I don't. I have a background in music performance.
Music performance.
Yes. And play the flute, but eventually over time I decided to switch careers. I took, I think, maybe 2 classes at ACC, Austin Community College, and then from there really just did my learning on the job.
Wow. On the job? So how did you kind of go from playing the flute to taking a couple classes to now getting a job where you can actually learn that on the job?
Yeah. Well, when I got my music degree, I was a music teacher for a number of years. I taught in elementary, I taught private music lessons, I played in a professional orchestra, and there was eventually a point where I realized, I need to be able to afford modern creature comforts. I need to be able to ideally have a house, have proper health insurance. So for me, that was my aha moment. So I just looked into, what else can I do with the skills that I've cultivated thus far. And the good news is with music, it's heavily based on math, reading languages, algorithms to some degree. And so for me, it became pretty clear that computer science was something that I could, potentially go into. And when I did that, I thought I was probably, some weirdo. That's the first time someone's ever tried to make that connection. But once I started taking classes, pretty soon I realized that most of the folks I was meeting had some sort of creative background, music background. So for me, it was just a natural fit. And I think because of my music background, I pretty much got used to being scrappy. Like in terms of, hey, you want to learn something, you take a lesson with this person, you fly to this country, you study in this program. And so I used a lot of those same sort of networking skills whenever I switched careers. And I think that's really what helped me to kind of just learn very quickly on the job, because I'm used to rolling up my sleeves and just getting the job done.
Wow. Okay, so what tools and different technologies did you have to learn back then?
Yeah, so initially when so in school, you have your kind of like intro to computer programming classes. So that was kind of one extreme of, hey, it's time to learn C++, which is kind of a lot when you don't know programming at all. But then when I actually got the job, like I got my first job in tech support, which was maybe after I finished that C++ class, I started in tech support. I realized very quickly that actually on the job, what was more useful was basic troubleshooting skills, being able to figure out why something's breaking, try to reproduce the steps. And then in terms of actual like technologies, SQL was something I used pretty heavily early on.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and so between that, but then also then having that foundation from learning C++, even though it was painful, I was able to start to put, the pieces together of how you can break apart a problem into, workable steps and then, kind of build a new solution.
I see. Can you briefly kind of like explain what SQL is and how you used it?
Yeah. So SQL is, I think it stands for Structured Query Language, and so it's basically just a syntax that you can use to get information back from a large data set. And so the company I was at was medical software, so lots of patient data and clinician data and data for billing. And so oftentimes we'd have customers call, and it could be anything from, hey, I've got these clinicians at my facility, we need to onboard them into this tool, so can we make sure that we have everyone in the system? Or it could be something larger like, hey, our billing reports have been off, or our financials have been off for a few months. We need someone to dive in and see what's going on between this time and this time. And so very quickly I realized that trying to query that information through the UI was not sufficient
at all.
And so that's when I had to slowly but surely pick up SQL, which makes it so much easier to just say, hey, I want to get all the data from this table, or I want to get it for this time period with all the kind of metadata details as well. So that's a little bit about SQL and how I used it.
Wow. So I guess now, like, how many programming languages would you say that you know?
Yeah, so quite a number. But I will say, from working in software testing, you kind of have to not only test end to end, but typically have like an end to end knowledge of the systems you're testing, the tools and languages. So for me, I'm kind of a chameleon of tech and languages. Depending on the company I'm at, the problem that I'm trying to solve, I'll tend to kind of learn the language around that. So I have experience with Ruby. I'm currently working in JavaScript. I've used PHP, C++. I had to learn. Granted, that was a while ago now. C#, Java. I feel like Python is another, of course SQL, which is still more of a query language, but still use that. I know I've also used, Active Record with Ruby on Rails when we worked together. So lots of things.
About 8 to 9 different programming languages and technologies. That's crazy. So I know 2 programming languages, JavaScript and Ruby.
That's still really impressive, though.
Compared to 8? Wow. That's okay. So here, can you walk us through a typical day in the life of an SDET?
Yeah, sure. So typically we start our day by reviewing the automation test runs that we had from the night before. So we have what's called our nightly automation build. So we'll look through that and just see from all the tests that ran across all the different services that we support, what failed, what passed, and we start to distinguish between, were some of those failures flaky, is it an actual bug? And the good news is we've even automated that approach of being able to distinguish between the types, but was still just from a high level. Every morning we'll kind of look through the failures, reach out to the different quality engineers if they're not already aware of the issue, potentially reach out to specific like development teams or various stakeholders to say, hey, we noticed there were some failures, you'll need to look at on this environment or this service, and then from there a lot of our tasks relate to either like extending an existing framework that we're using or potentially building something new, because we do support like we have a distributed system, and each of our engineering teams typically supports one of many services. Oftentimes they'll need to test and verify or implement something new for that service, and sometimes solutions we've already implemented don't 100% work in a newer context. So oftentimes we're brought in to maybe extend an existing framework, maybe build something new, maybe build different types of tests than what we've had previously. So lots of activities there. And then of course we kind of do sort of like a support experience as well. So if, let's say, a quality engineer reports a bug within the framework, like maybe a test is just so flaky they don't know how to fix it, they'll create a ticket for us to, maybe figure out a different solution for that.
Wait. So what is the difference between a quality engineer and then SDET?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, honestly,
I thought that those were kind of similar.
Yeah, and so here's the thing, that is a great question. I've had that question as well, and really what it comes down to is the company. Surface level, some folks will say, oh, quality engineer, they're primarily going to do manual testing, and SDET, they're a developer that knows how to test, but it's not that cut and dry. And especially, I would say maybe in the past 5 years or so in this industry, quality engineering has really taken on more of like a DevOps responsibility. So even if you don't have the SDET title, oftentimes you have the SDET or DevOps type of responsibilities. And so at the end of the day, it comes down to the company. So I've noticed that when I've worked at companies where maybe there's only, 4 or 5 quality engineers, typically then we function as SDET, we function as, your standard embedded quality engineer that's a subject matter expert that, maybe does have to know how to manually test, but we're often still mostly creating automated tests. We're monitoring systems in different environments. We're building out frameworks. And so, so that's kind of the overall explanation, but it does depend on the company and maybe also the size of the company.
Interesting. So how much time do you spend writing code?
Yeah, so I would say, like, if I were to put a percentage on it, I would say maybe like 90% of my day is spent writing code, maybe 80%.
Really?
Let's say.
Wow.
I'll scale back a little because I am a lead, so I do have to do a lot of like cross-team collaboration, maybe like initiating certain efforts across teams. And so the other SDETs on the team that don't have that additional responsibility, they're probably writing code about 90% of the time, and let's say the extra 10% might be typical meetings and stuff like that.
Okay, interesting. So here, coming from a music and teaching background into this tech field, did you ever deal with imposter syndrome?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Really?
Most definitely. So the thing that was interesting to me with that exact paradigm and the imposter syndrome is I pivoted very early in my tech career from tech support to engineer. I think that transition took less than a year. I went into it thinking, oh, okay, I'm taking classes at ACC, I'm in tech support, this is great, I can learn on the job, but surely I'll be doing this for maybe like 3-4 years, and then maybe, the powers that be will grant me the privilege to be an engineer. No, it was within a year, and it was really just because going back to being gritty and rolling up my sleeves, early on into getting that tech support job, I started networking with other folks like in engineering, and even my immediate manager, I was like, hey, listen, these are my goals for my career. I'm going to school right now to be a programmer, and I would really love to meet folks in the engineering department and get a feel for what they do, because ultimately I want to end there. And so I think because I made my goals known very early on, not only did I have an awesome manager that fully supported me and was like, hey, I'll do you one better. I'm going to print up the job description of tech support, and I'm going to print up a job description of like entry-level engineer, and I want you to meet with this engineering manager, show him these two things, and ask him how you can bridge the gap between those two. So between that and having someone that believed in me, but then being able to literally get that return on my investment very early on, even when I wanted to have imposter syndrome, which I still did, the reality made it almost impossible, because I had to step out of myself and be like, whoa, how did this even happen? Like, I know I had this goal, I know I went to school for that, but this is actually faster results than my music career.
Okay, wow. So have you ever thought about becoming a software engineer?
Oh yeah, most definitely. And honestly, I think that's something I kind of toggle back and forth, and especially right now with being an SDET, like that role, depending on who you talk to, it's like, oh yeah, you're basically a dev. You just happen to do testing, Other folks are, you're just a tester that happens to know really, high quality development practices. So yeah, I think for me, the desire to be a developer is always there. And I will say this, not to sound too cliche, is the beauty of being an advocate for software quality is you don't have to work in testing or test engineering or quality assurance or anything to be able to use those skills. Like, as long as you have that drive and that conviction to make sure that, products are high quality and really mentor your team and help folks understand how to like build things efficiently, you can use those skills in whatever role. And so that's the thing that, then depending on what role I'm on, that's the thing that kind of keeps me honest, is like I do have a passion for software quality and I do love writing code. So as long as I can do those things together, it doesn't really matter what the exact role is.
I see. That's cool. That's cool. What type of mindset and skills would you say is like important to just being in this field?
Yeah, I think the main mindset that's important is the willingness to learn and also the ability to accept that learning is not always going to be an easy thing. I think honestly the only difference between a junior engineer and a senior engineer is a senior engineer has been through those motions time and time again. They know what it's like to have to learn something new and they're like, I don't understand, or you try it and you fail, or you get an error message and you're like, I don't get it. And I think I saw a meme recently where it's like, oh, phew, thank God, a different error message, and the person has like trash on their desk. But I know that feeling where it's like, okay, at least I got through that. But for a senior engineer, you're used to those patterns, so you're kind of like, this is the part where I'm going to be frustrated. This is the part where I'll have a quick win. This is the part where I solve the problem. This is the part where I teach it to someone else. Versus a junior or someone new to the industry, you might think like, oh, this is really hard. Like maybe this was a mistake. Like I don't know how people do this. I just assumed that they had this ability from day one. So I think as long as you can be open to the fact that you're going to have to always be learning, but that it's not going to be easy and you will have to put in the work, but it will be worth it, you know, and it is an incremental process.
Okay, so what do you enjoy most about this role that you do?
I would say the variety of sort of responsibilities, I guess, just because it's not just coding, it's not just testing, it's not just cross-team collaboration. It really is a holistic knowledge of how can we do better, how can we work together better, how can we anticipate certain changes in infrastructure or architecture early enough that we can start making decisions, like even just via conversation to figure out, like, you know what, that might not work because XYZ, let's also consider, ABC. And so for me, I love that in this role, I really get visibility into our systems and how we're working, not just like how we're working within our teams, but even across teams. Because one thing I've noticed with companies, especially with distributed systems, a lot of times the teams end up being very siloed.
Can you kind of speak to what that is? Distributed systems?
Yeah. So I would say back in the day, I don't know, let's say pre-2010s, most software systems were referred to as basically being a monolith, where it's just, you have one massive code base and it's kind of like everyone kind of gets in there and change stuff and you kind of hope you didn't break everything, so you kind of get a too many cooks in the kitchen situation. And so since then, different technologies have come into existence like Docker, Kubernetes, and just this concept of microservices, but you can think of it on a basic level of just a service. So it's just a thing that handles something very specific. So if it's an e-commerce site, a service to handle checking out, or a service for
fulfillment orders.
Exactly. And so when you have those sort of systems where you have teams that are built now to support a specific service, eventually what starts to happen is, now that you don't have that fear of the monolith where you got all the cooks in the kitchen and you hope you don't break anything, in that environment at least, people are more aware of like the repercussions of changes they may make, or at least they know like, ooh, I made this change, don't be surprised if something breaks, let me make sure I communicate it across teams. But when it's separated, now you're kind of like, only my team needs to worry about it, we're good. And so as a result, a lot of the very specific subject matter expert knowledge about that service, and still certain things that might change in your service that could affect something else, a lot of those sort of talking points get lost in translation because that knowledge is siloed. And so with my role, I get the luxury of, maybe working with a silo team and realizing I don't have all the information, this doesn't really make sense. And so then I dive a little deeper, I become like a private investigator, and I find out, another team built this service and that's why this is breaking. We probably need to have some tests for that so that we can catch this earlier.
That's good. What about your job do you enjoy the least, though?
I would say, like, as much as I just said, working with the silo teams and bring them together, it is still like herding cats to try to like get everyone on the same page, especially when these systems, these ways of working, these teams predate you joining the company. So it's like a double responsibility of you're first still trying to be onboarded yourself. Like, so how does this work? And if I have a question, who do I go to? Yeah. But then also there's these established ways of working, and you're asked to come in and kind of solve all the problems, but you need to have all the information to do that. So that part can be, difficult or frustrating, but in my opinion, as long as, and I think I'm decent at this, is as long as you're good at delegating, and especially for me because I'm a lead, I don't necessarily have to be in every single meeting. I don't have to meet with every single team to make sure I specifically know what's going on. I can delegate those responsibilities and, have one SDET meet with, a certain team and get whatever information and so forth. And then, between having the different tools that we use just to share knowledge, when we start doing that, then it opens the eyes of the folks on the teams as well. So they realize, oh, you know what, we should probably create a document for this and share this across teams. And so even though initially it is kind of like herding cats, once you kind of figure out a strategic way of working through that, it's very rewarding.
Okay, that's good. Let's talk salary and money. Right?
Yeah.
So what type of salary ranges can somebody expect in this field?
Yeah, so the interesting thing with SDET, so this kind of goes back to what you asked earlier. What's the difference between a quality engineer and an SDET? So the salary range can vary wildly based on
the title.
The title, but also the company's like definition of SDET. Like I've seen some companies where they're like, oh, an SDET, that's basically just a quality engineer. We're just giving you a different title. And let's say you're based in a low cost of living like location, that salary could range between maybe about 80K to maybe 100K, but that's kind of on the higher end in that type of context.
Yeah.
But if it's more of like what I'm doing, where it's like, hey, no, you're more of a developer that happens to know how to test, and you're a bridge between quality and developers, you're monitoring, you're building frameworks, then the range opens up even more. Then you're talking more anywhere from 110 to maybe up to 150. And a lot of what determines that higher range of salary really just is based on where you're living, the size of the company, maybe the types of systems you're working on. So it's definitely a very like lucrative industry. And then the good news is, like with those ranges I mentioned, that's typically where you could start, but if you're good at your job, you get promoted. I've oftentimes seen companies where they'll say like, okay, yeah, we hired you on as a senior SDET, but you know what, you're really crushing it. We're going to go ahead and make you principal or staff or what, so then that range opens up even more. And it's great, like, especially if you don't ever, have a desire to be a manager, for example, it's a great way to, like, as an individual contributor, get that opportunity to have that higher type of salary that perhaps a manager would typically only be able to get.
I see. Are you interested in that, like
in management?
Yeah, management.
It depends. Like I've kind of gone back and forth in it. Like I think on one hand, I absolutely love collaboration and I love mentoring folks. And
I think you'd be a great. I just want to add that. Like I think you would be a great manager. So.
Thank you. I mean, I'll say this. I think. If I were to be a manager, I'd have to be like a hands-on manager, not like a micromanaging hands-on manager, but literally I love working in technology. I love learning. That I think for me, I die a little inside if it's like you'll be a manager. Yeah, like if it's just you're going to manage, but you need to really, create these spreadsheets and do these presentations. Like I know there's people that are built for that and they love it, and I'm, more power to them. But for me, I want to be the one that's like, oh yes, I'm leading the team, but also like, what do you think about this technology? Yeah. Let's explore.
Okay. Well, here, for anyone that is interested in making this switch, like what core fundamentals would you recommend that they learn? Just pretty much like how could they go about trying to prepare to make this switch?
Yeah, so core fundamentals, it depends on, okay, if let's say they do want to be an SDET or just some sort of like writing code to some degree, I would say ideally maybe some object-oriented like programming fundamentals, and I would start ideally with a language that's like a bit more human readable, whether it's Ruby or Python is also a great one, or like a language that not only is it easy to read and hopefully easy to understand, but ideally what helps, especially if you know you want to be in the industry, is start looking into roles and looking at the job descriptions to see like what is it that they're actually asking for, because you can kind of get the most bang for your buck that way of really tailoring your learning towards the job you want to do, or at least the job you want to start with. Because I think oftentimes in technology, there's so much information out there. There's so many languages. There's so many opinions of how to do things and the right way and the wrong way that, especially if you're new, that can be overwhelming to know where to start. So for me, I like to, if I feel like I'm getting analysis paralysis, I like to kind of force the scope onto the situation. So if I know, hey, I want to go into the industry, I'm okay with being a junior developer, maybe doing contract work, get as specific as you can and start looking at what they require for that role. And then from there, the beauty with programming right now is that there's so many folks that are doing it. There's so many free resources online. So I would strongly urge to start working on some projects, like no matter how simple. Like for example, for myself, yes, I've been doing specifically software testing for a number of years, and now I'm an SDET. But just for fun, because I wanted to start learning React, I did the React tutorial online just to do a tic-tac-toe game. So it might sound, fun? Yeah.
That's how you have fun.
I like that perspective, because in my mind I'm thinking, some people might think it's cheesy that it's a tic-tac-toe game, but for me I was like, all right, I get to learn, and for you you're like, wait, just for fun.
Wow.
But just start somewhere and just build up from there.
Okay, awesome. Well, do you have any shout outs, any tips or advice, or just anything else to kind of close up the interview?
Yeah, so for me, if you can't tell, I'm a black female. So the main shout out I would love to give is, like I mentioned earlier, that first manager I had in tech support, another black female, Mayoka Walker is her name, amazing. And I truly believe that if I did not have that manager give me that extra boost of confidence of, I hear that you have these goals, and let's take it a step further, and let's get that meeting set up with that engineering manager. If that didn't happen, I guarantee that my journey, especially switching careers, but then also going from tech support to engineering in a year, there's no way I would have had that much success, especially early on. So for me, number one, you got to find yourself a good mentor or a sponsor, and I think in this case, she was more of a sponsor. She was someone that was like, hey, listen, I'm a manager, I'm going to advocate for you. I'm going to use whatever power or leverage I have to help to build you up. And so for me, I continue to pay that forward. Cool. Special shout out to her. She's amazing. And then from there, I think just in general, if you work at a company that has if you can find one that has just a great culture, that's, I personally love companies that just really let you know, hey, we're all about learning. We're willing, to have you learn on the job. We're going to help you pay for whatever certifications you need. Those companies do exist. I know there are some that are you got to, hit the ground running day one, but that's not all companies. So if you can find one that really, just believes in your character and your drive, and they're willing to invest in you, that goes so far. Because again, with that first company, I think that the job description for tech support, I don't even remember most of what it said, but the things that stuck out to me were, you need to have 1 or more years experience in customer service, and I was like, that's it. And it was must have a good sense of humor. I'm like, really? And yeah, I got the job, I loved it, and the whole company was just awesome and great culture. And so that's another thing. It's just, they do exist, and it might seem discouraging initially, especially if you're trying to switch careers. Don't be surprised if you get a lot of rejections up front, because it is difficult for folks to especially look at a resume that might reflect a prior career, maybe no experience whatsoever, and for them to believe in you. But just trust me that there will be someone that does believe in you, and that's going. All you need to just light that fire and keep on going.
Wow, thank you. Appreciate you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you, TJ. This was great.
All right, y'all, enjoy.
Thank you.